All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're going to be taking a wider look at some of the atrocities perpetuated by Israel onto the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. We've been releasing a lot of stories recently, kind of doing case-by-case scenarios, talking about different angles and different aspects of this conflict, or rather this genocide. But I thought it would be useful after this delay in putting out some new content to kind of like zoom out and just look at the human cost and the human horror of Israel's actions in Gaza, right? Because I think, especially as time goes by with these sort of ongoing horror shows, ongoing, atrocity stories, crimes against humanity, I know all of us can begin to get a little desensitized to it. We start looking at statistics like the 24,000 dead in Palestine, and these things start to become numbers instead of people. So I figured it would be useful and humanizing to look at some of these more intimate human stories of tragedy. But along with that, we will also be, kind of looking at individual, aspects or cases of this story. For example, we have one of the articles we'll be discussing is from Plus 972 magazine, which we have sourced here on the channel before, detailing life in one of these detainment camps, right? So we'll be discussing that. And then towards the end, after we've gone through some of these human stories, we'll be making an effort to sort of put arguments against the claims that Israel has been making, such as in particular with Hamas supposedly engaging in systematic rape as a weapon of war. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard some content attempting to dispel that. We've seen the New York Times article that continued to perpetuate this narrative despite the fact that it's been debunked. But I thought it would be useful as we talk about some of these actual real existing tragedies, real human stories, to contrast that with the lies that Israel has put out, right? So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and jump into the content here. I'm going to start by rolling this video here. Now, I'm sure some of you have already seen this because it went viral, all over the internet, this video or these pictures of Palestinian people being stripped naked, humiliated on camera, and then brought to a larger arena. And apparently, as it says here, video appears to show children among Palestinian men stripped and detained by IDF. But I just wanted to go ahead and roll this, even though you may have already seen it, just to bring the image back into your mind, because we're going to be discussing what it was like inside this detainment process, right? So we'll go ahead and roll this for you guys.
Appears to show Palestinian men and at least 2 children in a stadium in Gaza being stripped to their underwear and detained by Israel Defense Force soldiers. Now, we have geolocated the video. We know where it was taken, but we cannot independently verify when this actually happened. It was posted on Christmas Eve. In the past, Israel has said that the reason why they strip people down is to check them for explosives. And even Israel says within the last week or so, as they were going house to house in Gaza, they did find a stash of weapons, including explosive vests that Israel says were...
Okay, anyway, so obviously he goes on to run fucking flack for it. Why would we be surprised from, CNN with colonizer news network, right? But yeah, the images out of that are pretty fucking egregious, and honestly, the ones that are depicted here are somewhat tame. We will see more as we go into the Plus 972 article. But people have talked about this is very reminiscent of the sort of images we saw in the Holocaust, and you put these alongside some of the images we've seen of literal trenches full of body bags, also very reminiscent of the Holocaust, right? But I just wanted to roll that for you guys to kind of refresh your memory and put those images back into your head as we go into this article, as egregious and horrifying as it is. I mean, it's kind of the nature of the beast when we discuss these things. It's good to, I know this stuff is emotionally and honestly spiritually exhausting. I can say for me personally, that's why I've struggled the last couple of weeks to produce more content again. I know I was going at quite a clip there, but I tell you what, guys, I can only take in so much of this information and see so much of these images before it starts to hurt my soul too. And been doing this for 5 years, independent media, and you guys know that I'm a very resilient guy. I've kept doing this, kept discussing the issues despite everything in my own personal life and the toll that this kind of work takes on me, on any of us that do independent media. I know one of you guys had a joke that said when I did a side-by-side picture of when I started this channel versus now, and one of you said, you went from baby-faced journalism major to hardened war correspondent really quickly. And, I do carry some of the stress and horror of this on my face over the years, but that's, again, I'm rambling, but that's why I kind of took a little bit of a break over the holidays, and it ended up extending longer than I wanted to, because it was hard for me to want to plug back into this stuff. But unfortunately, if we're going to seek truth and if we are going to seek justice and be on the right side of history, especially those of us living in the empire, we have a responsibility to see the actions that our empire is responsible for, right? Anyway, without any more rambling for me, we'll go ahead and jump into this here, guys. Again, this is Plus 972 magazine. Inside Israel's torture camp for Gaza detainees. Palestinians arrested in the northern Gaza Strip describe how Israeli soldiers systematically abuse civilians and combatants alike, from severe deprivation to physical violence. This is from January 5th, 2024, so somewhat recently this expose came out, right? In early December, images circulated worldwide showing dozens of Palestinian men in the city of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip who were stripped to their underwear, kneeling or sitting hunched over, then blindfolded and put in the back of Israeli military trucks like cattle. The vast majority of these detainees were civilians with no affiliation to Hamas. Israeli security officials later confirmed, and then men were taken away by the army without notifying their families of the detainees' whereabouts. Okay, so with this, guys, when these images were first coming out, obviously we had Israel putting out this narrative that these were, I guess I can't fully remember now, either that they were confirmed Hamas agents that they had captured or that they were Hamas militants that had surrendered. It was like a week or two after that after, flack from journalists, even in Israel, came out and said that, no, they actually ended up, like 80% of them ended up being civilians. Of course, with this, they did a whole PR campaign with these, civilians, these victims, where they had these naked men handing over guns, which it's like, it was so clearly one of these instances of Israeli propaganda, because they're already stripped naked and detained in all this stuff and have already been processed, and now they're handing in their guns. I mean, one of these just absolutely cartoonish examples of Israeli propaganda, right? But as we've seen now, they've came out and said that most of these people were civilians, right? Plus 972 magazine local call spoke with 4 Palestinian civilians who appeared in these photos or were arrested near the scene and taken to Israeli military detention centers, where they were held for several days or even weeks before being released back to Gaza. Their testimonies, along with 49 video testimonies published by various Arabic media outlets of Palestinians arrested in similar circumstances, indicate systematic abuse and torture by Israeli soldiers against all the detainees, civilians, and combatants alike. Says that there was electric shocks, burned their skins with lighters, spat in their mouths, and deprived them of sleep, food, and access to bathrooms until they defecated on themselves. Many were tied to a fence for hours, handcuffed and blinded for most of the day. Some testified to having been beaten all over their bodies and having cigarettes extinguished on their necks or backs. Several people are known to have died as a result of being held in these conditions. So obviously, guys, I should have given you a trigger warning there. Some of the stuff I'm about to read of these personal testimonies are going to be really fucking horrifying. So if you're somebody that is triggered by abuse of this kind, go ahead and skip in probably by 10 minutes or so. But again, I think it's valuable to see these things if we're living in empire and you can stomach it. I think it's important to see the byproduct of our empire, right? The Palestinians we spoke with said that on the morning of December 7th, when the Beit Lahia photos were taken, Israeli soldiers entered the neighborhood and ordered all civilians to leave their homes. They were shouting, "All civilians must come down and surrender." Obviously, this is one of the very famous images we've seen here. I mean, this is one of those photos that's going to go down in history, guys. Like, South Vietnamese soldiers executing a supposed guerrilla at gunpoint. You've seen that famous image with the snub-nosed revolver. I mean, this is one of these images that's going to go down in the history of warfare and decolonization, right? It's very seminal 4 different witnesses separately told Plus 972 and local call that while sitting handcuffed in the street, soldiers entered homes in the neighborhood and set them on fire. I mean, just another example of Israel destroying civilian architecture, civilian infrastructure, right? Let's say that every single one of these men was terrorists. What purpose does it serve to burn down those homes? None other than to strike fear and horror into the hearts of Palestinian people, right? The soldiers told the detainees they had been arrested because, quote unquote, they didn't evacuate to the southern Gaza Strip. The Israeli army has arrived. This is a quote from an Israeli officer during this process. The Israeli army has arrived. We destroyed Gaza City and Jabalia on your heads. We occupied Jabalia. We are occupying all of Gaza. Is that what you want? Do you want Hamas with you? The Palestinians shout back that they are civilians. Our house burned down in front of my eyes, one said. So this quote from an Israeli officer, I mean, this is what they're doing. This is why they are bombing indiscriminately. This is why they are destroying hospitals. This is the process of the genocide, why they are doing these things, why they're doing this photo op. It is to humiliate. It is to horrify. It is the idea that these level of atrocities and humiliation will turn the public, the Palestinian populace, against Hamas, right? It's a similar process we've talked about in past episodes. This is the point of sanctions regime with the United States government. This is why they do sanctions, is to hopefully, turn the public, make it so miserable for the public that they will turn against the regime, right? This is what they're doing in Palestine as well. This is what the U.S. government's policy of carpet bombing in Vietnam was for, was to hopefully turn the public against the militant groups. But in a past episode, we also discussed and cited studies out of the U.S. government and military, how these campaigns of indiscriminate terror actually have the opposite effect. They actually turn people into radicals, into militants, right? And they also cited, the really intense bombing campaigns by the Allies over Nazi occupied Europe as another example of this didn't actually facilitate the surrender of the Nazis. It actually made them fight longer and harder because the regime and the German people in turn thought that they were facing a war of annihilation. So if we're facing a war of annihilation, what other choice do we have but to fight to the bitter end, right? So this is the same thing going on here in Israel, right? I told the soldier, my house burned down. Why are you doing this? And he said, forget about this house. He asked me where it hurt, then hit me hard. More than 660 Palestinians from Gaza are currently known to be detained in Israeli prisons, most of them in Ketziat prison in the Negev desert. An additional number, which the army refuses to reveal, but could be as high as several thousand, are being held in several military bases, these black sites, including the Taman military base near Be'er Shiva, where much of the abuse of detainees alleged to have taken place. According to the testimonies, the Palestinian detainees from Beit Lahia were loaded onto trucks and taken to a beach. They were left there bound for hours, and another photograph of them was taken and circulated on social media. That was the one at the top of this article. Labad recounted how one of the female Israeli soldiers asked several detainees to dance and then film them. And this is an example that you see with colonizers, and we'll talk about the use of rape by colonizers against women as a method of conquest. But this type of humiliation depicted here is an example of what colonizers do to emasculate a population, right? It's not enough to bomb, to kill, to exploit the labor and resources of a region. You have to break the spirit of the people in order for them to, quote unquote, kneel to subjugation of the colonial master. This is what this is. And I mean, this is just such a telling example of what the kind of culture, military culture, colonial culture that Israel has, right? And we saw the United States doing the same thing in, I believe it was Iraq, in Abu Ghraib, right? The detainees, still in their underwear, were then taken to another beach inside Israel near the Zakim army base, where, according to their testimonies, soldiers interrogated them and severely beat them. Meher recounted his experience to plus 972. A soldier asked me, "What's your name?" and started punching me in the stomach and kicking me. He said, "You've been in Hamas for 2 years. Tell me how they recruited you." I told him I was a student. 2 soldiers opened my legs and punched me there and punched me in the face. I started coughing and realizing that I wasn't breathing. I told them, "I'm a civilian. I'm a civilian." I remember reaching my hand down my body and feeling something heavy, Meher continued. I didn't realize it was my leg. I stopped feeling my body. I told the soldier that it hurt, and he stopped and asked me where. I told him in the stomach, and then he hit me hard in the stomach. They told me to get up. I couldn't feel my legs and couldn't walk. Every time I fell, they beat me again. My mouth and nose were bleeding, and I fainted. I mean, this is the horrors of occupation. And, you know, this isn't like, yes, it's been escalated, but this is what the Palestinian people have been dealing with for 75 years, especially after the occupation in 1967. It's just horrifying, guys. We were sent back to Gaza and reached their homes that same night. Labad himself was part of a second group of about 100 detained in Beit Lahi that day who transferred to a military detention facility inside Israel. We were tortured all day. Inside the military base, the Palestinians were held in clusters of around 100. According to the testimonies, they were handcuffed and blindfolded the whole time. They were only permitted to rest between midnight and 5 a.m., so sleep deprivation is a war crime. It's a form of torture. One of the detainees in each cluster, whom the soldiers chose because he knew Hebrew and was given the title Shawish, a slang term for servant or subordinate, was the only one without a blindfold. The former detainees explained that the soldiers guarding them had green laser flashlights that they used to mark anyone who moved, changed position because of pain, or made a sound. The Shawish brought these detainees to soldiers standing on the other side of the barbed wire fence surrounding the facility where they were punished. I mean, this is very much reminding me of Guantanamo Bay, obviously. And that's no surprise, and that's a little addendum. We know that Israel trains American police, trains American military, and trains police. And, you know, we're beginning to see these sorts of horror tactics used domestically as well by police departments. And this is an example of the colonial empire, what it does on the fringes of empire and the periphery of the empire coming home into the empire, the imperial core, as the contradictions and horror and decay of the empire begins to accelerate, right? What we've done in the fringes of the empire begins to come home to the domestic population. We were tortured all day. We knelt head down. Those who didn't succeed were tied to the fence 2 or 3 hours until the soldier decided to let him off. I was tied up for half an hour. My whole body was covered in sweat. My hands became numb. If you put your hands down, the Shawish takes you outside and the soldier beats you. I was tied to the fence twice, and I kept my hands up because there were people around me who were really getting hurt. One person came back with a broken leg. You hear the beating and screaming on the other side of the fence. You are afraid to look or peek through the blindfold. If they see you looking, it's a punishment. They will take you out or tie you to the fence too. People were tortured all the time. We heard screaming. The soldiers said to us, "Why did you stay in Gaza? Why didn't you go south?" And I told them, "Why should we go to the south? Our home's still standing. We are not connected to Hamas." They told us, "Go down to the south." You celebrated the Hamas attack on October 7th. The detainees heard beatings. They heard the detainee cursing a soldier and then a gunshot. They don't know if the detainee was actually shot or whether he is alive or dead. In any case, he did not return for the rest of the time. I'm guaranteeing he was fucking executed. People died inside. One had heart disease. They threw him out. They didn't want to take care of him. They said that prior to his arrival, an elderly man from Al-Shati refugee camp who was ill died at the facility as a result of conditions of detention. The detainees decided to go on a hunger strike to protest his death and return their rationed piece of cheese and bread to the soldiers. The detainees told Labad that at night soldiers came in and severely beat him while handcuffed and then threw tear gas canisters at him. The detainees stopped striking. I mean, this is just horrifying. Israeli army confirmed in plus 972 that there were known cases of death. The bodies of detainees are being held in accordance with military orders. Yes, because they don't want to show the marks of deprivation and torture. I was detained for 18 days, a young man told Al Jazeera. The soldier sees you falling asleep, takes a lighter, and burns your back. They put out cigarettes on my back a few times. One of the guys who was blindfolded said to the soldier, I want to drink water, and the soldier told him to open his mouth and then spat in it. They put cigarettes out on our necks, hands, and backs. They kick you in the hands and head, and there are electric shocks. If you say, I want to drink, they beat you all over your body. There is no difference between the old and young. I am 62 years old. They hit me in the ribs, and I have had trouble breathing ever since. 2002 unlawful combatants law. This Israeli law allows the state to hold enemy fighters without granting them prisoner of war status and to detain them for extended periods of time without standard legal proceedings. Israel can prevent detainees from meeting with a lawyer and postpone judicial review for up to 75 days. This is literally, these people are just disappeared, which again is another war crime, and it reminds me a great deal of the internment laws that IRA militants and even civilians living in Northern Ireland faced throughout the period of the Troubles, particularly in the late 70s and early 80s, right? They don't exist for 45 days. Their families are not notified. During this time, people can die. No one will know about it. Apparently he didn't cooperate with them during interrogation. They beat him brutally next to me. They told him, you're defending Hamas. You're not answering questions. I mean, this is just insane. I mean, I won't go on with any more of this stuff, guys, because it's just more of the same. Horror after horror after horror. One of them says, we were treated like chickens or sheep. This is the face of Israel, guys, and I know a lot of you know it, but there is no justification for this. I don't care what you think Hamas did on October 7th, and a lot of it has been disproven or proven to be exaggerations by the Israeli military and Israeli officials. There is no justification for this. I mean, these are horrors upon horrors, guy. It's hard to even read. All right, guys, let's go on to some of this other material. Just, again, pretty egregious insights to some of these detainment camps. But we're going to see this isn't just, these sorts of abuses aren't just happening in this particular detainment camp with these sort of famous viral images. It is systemic throughout all this occupation, and particularly during this escalation. And it goes to children, to women, oftentimes the most vulnerable people, right? Mothers and things like that. So we have this article here from Al Jazeera, threatened with rape. Yama Kater recalls the horrors while in Israeli jails. A 47-year-old writer says verbal and physical abuse prominent against prisoners in Israeli jails following October 7th. So again, this is another example of why this is a genocide too, guys, because they aren't targeting Hamas. Like, this isn't the point. They're targeting hospitals, they're targeting doctors, they're targeting lawyers, they're targeting poets, they're targeting the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people, right? The people that produce the culture and the technical know-how to, build and create a society and a culture, right? It's another example of this. Kater had been in prison for about a month, an exceptionally painful one, it seemed. After Israeli forces stormed her home in Hebron, and arrested her, she was shuttled from one detention center to the other, unsure of what she was charged with or what would happen next. A writer and journalist who has covered crimes and violations committed by Israeli occupation and who has been in Israeli jails herself, Kater found herself subjected to pain and indignities all over again. She had been detained in the past 13 months, but said her detention after October 7th was incomparable to previous times. Handcuffed with plastic zip ties that dug painfully into her wrist, Kater was thrown on the floor of the army jeep and taken to Kiryat Arba settlement camp. She could not see the face of her husband, Hazim al-Fakuri, or her 5 terrified children. Her interrogation began in Kiryat Arba, and during the first session, the Israeli officers threatened her with rape, among other things, she said. They threatened to kill me, my family, burn my house down, Kater recalled. So I want to contrast that with these other things that we're talking about and seeing with the sort of testimonies we're having out of Israeli hostages that were held by Hamas, coming out told that they were treated with the utmost respect, that they were given amenities. We've even heard, and this is not just one or two, this is all of the Israeli hostages essentially are saying that they were treated with the utmost respect. We've seen video and stuff as well of, Hamas militants, Qassam Brigade militants, Israelis asking, are you going to kill us? And the Hamas militants saying, we will die before you die. And then on top of that, we obviously have seen Israeli indiscriminate bombing and shooting, killing Israeli hostages that they're claiming to protect and trying to liberate, right? They threatened to kill me, my family, burn my house down. They also, she added, threatened to deport her to Gaza and more, telling her that she was a prisoner of war and that they could do whatever they wanted. From there, Qatar was moved for 4 days to Hasharan prison, where she was held with 5 other Palestinian women in a tiny cell built for one prisoner. They did not have access to water to clean the cell either, she added, explaining that their water supply was cut off for 8 hours a day. There was so little room with the 6 women, they had to take turns to sit and sleep. After Hasharan, she was moved to Damon prison. How many fucking prisons does Israel have? A lot, if you're trying to imprison and create a concentration camp for an entire nationality of people, ethnicity of people. Where she was stripped, searched, and insulted. She also saw other prisoners being badly beaten. Sentenced to 6 months of administrative detention, which allows Israeli authorities to hold people indefinitely without charge. But then she met a woman from Hebron who had just been rounded up in Israel dragnets, and the woman told her that her husband had also been arrested. So, for all that Israel knows, that those 5 children have no caregiver now. They don't give a fuck. That meant that her 5 children were alone, probably even more worried and scared. A Shabak officer came to gloat to me, smiling and saying, Shabak is military police, by the way, your kids are alone now. During this time, Qatar was shocked at the level of inhumane treatment that the Damon guards meted out to the women. Sometimes they would use pepper spray point blank against the women for any perceived slight. They would also put prisoners in solitary confinement, severely limit their access to food and canteens to buy necessities, and deny them sanitary pads. Fucking... Yeah, and then Israel's going on about this fake-ass shit of the systemic rape and violence against women. Look at this, guys. Just look at this. Finally, she was moved to Ophir prison, yet another prison, at the end of November to wait in a cold cell for hours with neither food nor water until she was freed at dawn. Up to very last minute, officers and guards were threatening her. They told me that any celebration is prohibited and that I was forbidden from receiving any well-wishers upon my release, she said, adding that Israeli officers also warned her not to publish on social media. They said they would re-arrest me if their rules were broken, and we've heard that from countless Palestinians as well. We're going to be going into this next article here, showing how this stuff is happening to Israeli children as well. And we've heard a long history now, at least since 2006, but really before that, of Palestinian children being detained and abused by Israeli military for the most common crime is throwing rocks at soldiers. And they're literally tortured and abused and sometimes raped, children being raped. And we've actually done a previous episode talking about Israel's open secret, how dozens and dozens of pedophiles every year flee to Israel because of their Jewish ancestry to flee accountability in other countries, right? But I'm going to open this here. God, I need a new computer, guys. My God. I'm going to open this here with a short video from Al Jazeera that kind of gives you some of these testimonies, right?
Osama Arabi was just 14 when he was arrested for the first time. He was at a protest when soldiers grabbed him. That was 7 years ago. It feels like yesterday.
We were protesting at a Fur prison gate. The army came and we escaped to the mountain. I ran for a long distance, but once they caught me, they beat me with their guns. They stepped hard on my back. When they arrested me, they kept beating me. Beating. Then they took me for interrogation.
He was taken to a military prison. There he was beaten again, verbally threatened, and refused access to a lawyer. Then he was strip-searched before being released without charge.
When they arrested me, they stripped me to search me. I didn't understand what they were searching for. They didn't say. It was humiliating. It made me very angry.
It's not unusual here to see children dragged away by the army or police. A new
Please
report by the
justify that
charity
to me.
Save the Children says what is happening in the military judicial system is a serious human rights concern. It reveals 42% of the children arrested were injured. Injuries included gunshot wounds and broken bones. 65% were arrested during the night, mostly between midnight and dawn. 86% were beaten at some point. 76% threatened with physical harm, and 60% hit with sticks or guns. 69% were strip searched. Boys made up 97% of the arrests.
Children are still being mistreated through the military detention system. They aren't the safeguarding measures that you would expect in place to keep children safe. Now, we're not saying children are above the law, but there must be safeguarding measures in place aligned to global juvenile justice standards to make sure that children are safe.
Israeli law doesn't apply
Fucking
in the West
insane.
Bank, but Israel has signed international agreements
just
to protect
abducting
children.
children.
One Israeli group says those treaties are being ignored.
Arrest should be the last resort when there is no other alternative, and the arrest should be for as short a period as possible. And of course, children have to be protected from violence, from threats, from other abuse.
The report doesn't go into great detail on the long-term impacts of these arrests and the psychological damage it can do to children for years to come. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Yeah, and then we wonder why Palestinian children grow up to be militants. I mean, this is the reality that Palestinians face from the womb to the fucking coffin. Abuse, humiliation, torture, subjugation, imprisonment. This is what it is. We have this is article tied to this video here. Palestinian minors arrested by Israeli forces face immense emotional and physical abuse, according to the rights group Save the Children, which has revealed the tragedy minors go through as detainees. In the report published on Monday, the group said some of the former child detainees it spoke to reported violence of a sexual nature, while many others were beaten, handcuffed, and blindfolded in small cages in detention centers. I can't imagine what this would be like to go through for a child. So, some of you probably know I work at a child's residential facility where we, care for, in a therapeutic environment, children that have been subject to abuse, children that don't have a stable home life. I can tell you firsthand that this trauma is all but permanent in these children. And it is such an uphill battle, even just from the domestic abuse and things that we see at my workplace. I cannot imagine what a military occupation and military imprisonment and military torture does to a child's psyche. And I've seen some pretty horrifying, or heard some pretty horrifying stories at my job. Everything here is like that times 1,000. So I can't imagine what you're doing to generation after generation of children. This has a lasting impact on a society that cannot even be measured quantitatively, right? Jason Lee, Save the Children's country director in the occupied Palestinian territory, said Palestinian children are the only ones in the world to experience systematic prosecution in military courts. There's a marked increase in number of former child detainees who suffer nightmares and insomnia and have difficulty returning to their normal life, and many reporting a decrease in hope for their futures. We already had some of these statistics from the video. They are also interrogated at unknown locations without the presence of a guardian or caregiver and often deprived of food or water or sleep. In addition, they are often refused to legal counsel. Save the Children said the former child detainees surveyed were from across the occupied West Bank and had been detained for 1 month to 18 months. The report says the main alleged crime for these detentions is stone throwing, which can carry a 20-year sentence in prison for Palestinian children. It is estimated that between 500 and 1,000 children are held in Israeli military detention each year. Osama Arabi, a former detainee who is now 44 years old, said he was strip searched. I mean, we already heard that. Our research shows once again that Palestinian children are subject to serious and widespread abuse at the hands of those who are meant to protect them. So not even children are safe. Obviously, we've seen in this war, of the 24,000 confirmed killed, over half are children and women. Right. This next thing I'm going to go into here is from PalestinianStudies.org. So one of the things that we've heard that Israel is using to justify their horrific genocidal campaign in Palestine is the use of systematic mass rape as a weapon of war by Hamas. Now, since then, we have seen independent journalists and analysts and NGOs discredit a lot of these claims. We know that Israel has had little to no victim testimony about these supposed mass rapes. And obviously there's so many loopholes in this as well. Like the Al-Aqsa flood took, maybe 6 to 7 hours total during that time while they're trying to seize hostages and do whatever it is they're doing during this campaign. When would there have been time for mass systematic rape? Usually in cases of military rape, example being like the Comfort Girl system in Japan, these sorts of things happen over long periods, over sustained occupation. That's when soldiers are barracked up and rooted down and have the time to be perpetuating these crimes against women, right? So obviously that's a huge loophole in this story already of when would this have happened. But I want to read this analysis by Rhonda Abel Fattah, who out of PalestineStudies.org, we actually covered a pretty widespread polling about support for armed action from this organization as well. And she just does a really great job bringing up concise arguments discrediting this mass rape hysteria, right? On December 28th, 2023, the New York Times published the now infamous Screams Without Words, How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October 7th. The report purported to uncover new details showing a pattern of rape, mutilation, extreme brutality against women, and attacks on Israel. It went viral globally. Israeli government claims this systematic sexual violence perpetuated against Israeli women by Hamas have been thoroughly and compellingly discredited and debunked by both independent investigative journalists and MENA, human rights and feminist organizations and initiatives. So going along with this, guys, I am not saying that rape did not happen. Terrifying things, horrible things, the worst things human beings are capable happen during wars. I don't doubt that somewhere along here, some cases of rape have happened. We know that Israel has committed mass rape and sexual violence. We have seen examples of it, including against children in some of the sources we have covered. But what I am saying is that there was no systematic use as a weapon of war of sexual violence against women. That did not happen. That did not happen. That was not a policy perpetuated by the Al-Qassam brigades, by Hamas. No. Okay, and some of these arguments here are really concise and great at discrediting that. It is normative practice for allegations of systematic rape used as a weapon of war to be subject to evidentiary standards of due process. 2 years after the Rwanda genocide of 1984, Human Rights Watch issued a report of its investigation of the systematic rape and sexual mutilation of 250,000 Tutsi women and girls and men by the Hutu-dominated government of Rwanda. The report was based on the testimony of rape victims themselves and rape victims who witnessed others being raped, other witnesses, doctors at the hospitals who traded hundreds of rape victims, humanitarian organizations with programs for women, the UN Special Rapporteur's report on the situation of human rights in Rwanda. Similarly, in 2000, Human Rights Watch issued its report into gender-based violence against Kosovar Albanian women based on rigorous evidentiary standards. However, in the case of Israeli claims of mass rape on October 7th, all standards of evidence and accountability have been suspended by institutionally powerful players, including Human Rights Watch. Indeed, those who demand that Israel be held to the same standards are accused of being anti-Semitic. And so here we are, even though Israeli police admit that they still have no victims or eyewitnesses. Even though the sister of the report's primary victim, Gal Abdush, has publicly denied that her sister was raped, accusing the New York Times of manipulating her family for the story. And even though there's no forensic evidence, and there are questions to be answered about the reliability and independence of the supposed witnesses and their testimonies put forward so far, the mass rape claims are still being circulated. So in these other past examples of mass sexual violence campaigns, we have floods and floods of testimonies, forensic evidence, testimonies, and eyewitness accounts from doctors who treated these cases. We have none of that from Israel. None of it. None. The two eyewitness accounts weren't people who were raped. They were people who said that they saw a rape, who, I'm sure maybe you guys have heard of this. I don't have the information here because we're already covering so much. They had already been discredited as witnesses because these are the same witnesses saying that they saw Hamas beheading people in the street. And that's later come out from Israeli officials and Israeli media as having been a lie or a fabrication or a half-truth. So no evidence for this. To even pose a question about why there are double standards in the case of Israel or why normative investigative practice is being suspended, liberal feminists resort to accusing those who take a critical intersectional approach of being rape apologists or not believing Jewish women or undermining the Me Too movement. Israeli and U.S. government claims of mass sexual assault are not the Believe Women or Me Too flex that they think it is. At the center of the Believe Women movement were women's voices, which are non-existent in this case. There are no women coming forward saying that they have been raped. Voices that are often silenced, discredited, ridiculed, and treated with hostility or contempt. However, when a critical race lens is applied to the absolutism of Believe Women, particularly in settler colonial contexts that are highly racialized with histories of lynching and vigilante settler violence, pernicious claims put black and brown men and their communities at great risk. To be clear, the allegations of mass rape have come from the Israeli regime, not women. This is where accountability is crucial. The compelling question here is if indeed women do come forward and there is evidence to make a case for systematic rape, does this then justify genocide? Going on here says, we are confronted with the political reality that sexual assault against Israeli women is being weaponized in the service of manufacturing consent for genocide against Palestinian men, women, and children in Gaza. Or as many have stated, the allegations of mass rape is being deliberately deployed to justify the mass slaughter of Palestinian people in Gaza, to justify domicide, the mass destruction of civic infrastructure in homes in Gaza, and to justify the forcible transfer of Palestinians from Gaza. This is the truth we land on. It is emphatically not anti-woman, anti-feminist, or anti-Semitic to name the political context in which the systematic rape allegations are being made. It is urgent that we call out rape atrocity propaganda and remind that this stratagem has historically been one of the most potent weapons used by white power to discredit, demonize, diabolize, and destroy black and brown men, and to deflect sympathy from those resisting oppression to the actual oppressors, and finally, to justify lethal responses. I'll just end this with this part here, guys. The genocide in Gaza has exposed the performative, selective compassion of so-called progressives, mainstream liberal feminists, academics sitting in gender studies departments, women's advocacy groups, and gender-based violence campaigners who have accepted and shared Israel's mass rape claims or remain silent, or have not spoken out against the cynical use of rape atrocity propaganda to justify Israel's genocidal campaign, have not only completely abandoned Palestinians in Gaza to the forces of militarized violence, they have exposed their own deep-seated racism and double standards. I have absolutely no doubt that such feminists who have dog-eared pages to Kill a Mockingbird would have sat in the courtrooms of America's Jim Crow-era southern states and silently watched as black men were accused of raping white women and duly sentenced to death. The fact is that Israeli mass rape campaigns are so emblematic of wartime atrocity propaganda that you have to be deeply committed to and affirmed by the racist tropes of Palestinian men to suspend all critical thinking, and in doing so consent to the genocide of Palestinian people. This is the sobering reality Palestinians face. The racism that animates hyper-attention over crimes imagined to have been committed against Israelis is the same racism that desensitized people to crimes actually committed against Palestinians. So again, this is the same sort of shit that happened in Jim Crow America. This is the wartime atrocity propaganda. This is the Gaddafi handed out Viagra to soldiers in Libya so they could rape a bunch. This is Iraqis throwing babies out of incubators in Kuwait. This is the classic trope, obviously, of Arab men being hypersexual and violent against women. This is the classic trope in, again, Jim Crow America of the big black man coming to rape the little white girl. This is what this is. They have zero evidence of it. This is the sort of stuff that gets people in the imperial court to justify crimes against humanity. They have zero evidence of it. On the other hand, we have countless testimonies, countless doctors giving eyewitness reports that they had treated rape cases, NGOs, women's organizations saying that Palestinian women are systematically abused and raped. We have stories of Palestinian women being sold into sex trafficking by Israelis. We have decades and decades of this information. But you're all supposed to turn a blind eye to that, to supposed mass rape campaigns that justify fucking mass bombing that has killed over 24,000 people in Palestine. This is the face of empire. It is horrifying when it happens to white settlers, to white people, to white women. It is just a matter of course and an exaggeration when it happens to brown and black women, right? That's really all I have here, guys. I better round this off because we went way over the 30 minutes that I had originally allotted. But I just wanted to, again, take a step back to humanize some of these horrors that are going on in Palestine as we get inundated with statistics and numbers of people dead. It's important to remember and put in context these absolute tragedies. I'm hoping to get back on the ball here with more analysis and news for you guys in the coming weeks and months. I feel myself coming out of the sort of block and super, seasonal depression, seasonal slump combined with the absolute horror of what all of us are having to read and digest every day with this, guys. Again, guys, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, drop that comment for the algorithm. If you want to support my independent media work, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/entitledmillennials. You can do that for $1 a month. Also, those one-time PayPal donations through paypal.me/entitledmillennials are greatly appreciated. And I want to give a special thank you to my comrade Sarah for helping me get my wheels rolling again. I'm looking forward to our partnership in the future. You're so incredibly intelligent and well-versed on this, and your help with getting these sources is really helping me get out of my funk here and stay focused. So really, really appreciate you, and of course appreciate everybody watching. Again, that's all I have for you. As always, guys, love hanging out with you, love talking the issues with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you all very soon. Bye-bye.
I'm staring into the rain. I don't feel anything.